Republicans dead. Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hi, folks, and welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. I'm your host, Rick Wilson. As always, we are trying to bring you the smartest folks out there to talk about and think about some of the things that are going to affect our country, not only in the election, but potentially beyond it. So I wanted to talk to Edward Goldberg today. He's an adjunct professor at NYU's Center for Global Affairs, knows a lot about political economy, about trade, and about the things that make America safe and prosperous in the world. And why the risks of some of the things that Donald Trump is proposing are the exact opposite of making America safe and prosperous in the world. So with that, Professor, thank you for coming on the show today. I appreciate your time. I wanted to start out by talking to you about where you see the stakes in terms of America in the global economy in this election.
Oh, wow. First, thanks for having me on. I think it's everything. I mean, it is, on so many levels. I don't know where to start. First, in a major historical reference, which I think many people don't know. In 1405, China was very open to the whole world. It was one of the richest countries, or the richest country in the world. It set out a huge fleet all the way through the Indian Ocean to Africa, under its Admiral Xing He, and was really to trade and show China's power. It was extremely successful, really increased the Chinese economy, brought back articles from around the world to China. New emperor comes about, gets threatened with the idea of foreigners and foreign goods coming into China. He burns the fleet.
Right.
He burns the fleet, and it took basically up until, I would say, I guess 1998, 2000, for China to be at the same place economically around the world since they closed it off from foreigners in 1433.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great story.
Well, I mean, and that is really the scale of what Trump is proposing when he says these global tariffs on every single product coming into America, closing in the particularly in the post-industrialization world, closing yourself off to trade is closing your economy down essentially.
Oh, totally, and it's total. And he also, doesn't remember. He doesn't know history, which is a big problem. We all know about Smoot-Hawley. I think Smoot-Hawley was the horrible tariffs passed in the 1929, which basically shut down world trade. It was passed by America. One example of it, America was the largest seller of autos in the world in 1929.
Okay.
Shipping to Europe and all over the world, basically. That collapsed. Immediately, what happens with tariffs, besides them being a tax on the consumer, basically, what happens with tariffs, it becomes a tit-to-tat war. So we put on high tariffs, our friends put on high tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
So with Smoot-Hawley, all of a sudden, our auto sales around the world just stopped, because instantly Germany, Spain, England, and all the other industrial countries put on tariffs against our cars. We had a mild recession in the United States. Ford was thinking about laying off people or not laying off people. All of a sudden, their business got cut dramatically. They started to lay off people. And guess what? We come to the Great Depression.
Right. And so in an era where America was still in a world, prior to all the things that make global trade possible today, containerization, globalization, all those things. That had a nuclear, like a bomb going off in the American economy. Talk to us about what it would be today if Donald Trump's tariffs were activated in the American economy of today. I mean, not only in the sort of meta sense, but to individual families who would suddenly be paying 100, 200, 300% more for everything.
It's tremendous on simple things. My wife and I had some fruit today from South America because it's out of season here in North America.
Sure.
If Trump tariffs came on, we wouldn't be enjoying that fruit. Simple things. Take jeans. Pair of jeans, you go into Gap today, buy a pair of jeans, they're $60 approximately.
Right.
If they were made in the US, they'd be $220, $240. An amazing tax on the American people. Besides that fact, with the high tariffs, you basically give the domestic manufacturers, you take away the competition so they could charge whatever they think they could get because there's no one competing against them.
So that idea that Donald Trump has in his head, that other countries are ripping us off by selling us goods at a low cost, and that there's some sort of huge negative externality to this. That's the center of his economic theory. That is the core of what he believes will or will not, make or break America's prosperity. And he's said this now for 40 years. He's been wrong the entire time. But what happens to China? What happens to Japan, India, Vietnam, all of our other trading partners if we shut the doors?
Well, it becomes a disaster for them. Once again, we go for tit for tat. Tariffs are like playing poker, except you can't pull out if you have a bad hand. You always have to see the next guy because your population wants you to see the next guy. So it's an impossible situation. So China will either raise its tariffs or it will lower the value of the yuan. Does the same thing.
Right.
Japan has the same problem. European Union is our biggest trading partner. Most people don't realize that. It's not China. Well, look at all the European Union products we have here, from wine to cheese to Mercedes to Volkswagen. They're all going to be cut out. So let's say you cut out the cars. What does that do? Price of cars just goes up in the United States. Plus, John Maynard Keynes had this great saying, it's old English, beggar thy neighbor, which means you make your neighbor poorer. And that's what you do with tariffs. You make your neighbor poorer.
So making our neighbors poor, making our citizens poor, all this, again, this hatred of globalization. I mean, there's an idea about globalization that it is the sole cause for the loss of manufacturing jobs in America. I would argue that the loss of manufacturing jobs in America is also because technology has improved and changed, and automation. And
I would totally agree with you.
That was my next question: is where do you see that?
Okay, the job loss from globalization. Yes, there was job loss. There was massive job loss in the 1990s, and in fact, in my opinion, we had a big failure in our government because they didn't step in to help the folks. Globalization is a function is old in world history, is basically human beings. It's part of our economic DNA. We're always exchanging ideas, always people are moving from here to there. People are conquering other people. We know about Alexander the Great. Let me interrupt. You know the great story about the tomato. Do I have a moment to tell it?
Sure, yeah, go.
Okay. The tomato that we love and enjoy, and we think actually represents Italian cooking because you have it with pasta,
right,
and everything else. The tomato originally, it's a great story about globalization. It originated in the Andes Mountains in Peru. It eventually goes up to the Mexicans, to the Aztecs. The Spanish conquistadors see it. They take it back to Spain. That's the first time it gets to Europe.
Sure.
About 100 years later, 50 years later, it gets to Italy. But now, because it's red, the Italians are afraid to eat it. They see it as the devil's food,
Right.
and they see,
Poisonous. They thought it was poisonous.
yeah, they saw it as poison, but they see it as a great table decoration. And in fact, Cosimo de' Medici writes in one of his diaries, what a beautiful table decorations tomatoes are. Okay. Eventually, let's say 100 years go by, then someone decides to boil it, and they end up with tomato sauce. Okay, how does it come back to us? Thomas Jefferson, the great horticulturist, has a friend in Europe. He learns about tomatoes, and he writes to his friend to send some tomato seeds to Monticello. So the first tomatoes grown in the United States are in Virginia at Thomas Jefferson's estate. Pure example of globalization.
Right.
Okay, is the tomato. The only difference is it took several hundred years, and now globalization happens instantly.
Right. All the friction's gone out of the system. And again, I'm in no way diminishing manufacturing jobs, but many of those jobs did not disappear because of NAFTA or
Absolutely.
trade agreements. They disappeared because we don't need 27 people to do the job one machine can do.
Well, take steel manufacturing. It used 20 years ago, it took 10 people to make a ton of steel. Now it takes one.
Right.
I mean,
and
the difference in automation is amazing. Look, all of us know, everyone that listens to your broadcast has gone to the supermarket. Where are the checkout people?
yeah,
It's all done by scanner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, that's automation. That has nothing to do with globalization.
Right. And America's economy migrated from heavy manufacturing to services, software,
Exactly.
knowledge work, etc. So I always feel like we sort of ignore that transition that we went through as computer technology and advanced manufacturing technology became dehumanized. It didn't require the same touch that it once did. But we've blamed trade for that, whereas trade is one of the great stabilizers in our world. That's the next question I wanted to ask you about is global prosperity requires a couple of things. It requires stability and security. It requires a rules-based international system, and it requires relatively low barriers to entry globally. We talked about how Trump's tariffs would be an economic bomb going off in the economy and the global economy, but the rule of law and the rules-based system really is an underpinning that makes those things all work, right?
Totally correct. It won't work without the rule of law.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And because Trump is sort of a guy famously not exactly in love with the rule of law, it strikes a lot of people, myself included, that this is a really dangerous moment.
Oh, I think it's true. Look, first of all, Trump is a guy, grew up in the New York real estate industry, hate zoning laws. Zoning laws
Right.
prevented him from building his condos.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
So this is his background that rules should apply to everybody but to me, because I can take advantage of a ruleless world where everybody else can't, and therefore I can make money from that. So,
yeah, and I do think that there's a certain degree to which the leaders of other countries look at Trump and they understand the psychology of Trump, and they can play on his ego and get. I mean, this is why this tariff situation would go completely sideways immediately, because, Xi or Putin would call and say, "You're the most brilliant leader ever. Give us exemptions on this, this, and this."
of course.
And that a lot of people would say, in Trump's own universe, would say, "Well, we got to give this guy a break. He's a friend, and this guy, we want to do a deal with him later." All this sort of petty corruption underneath this, I think, is very on brand for Donald Trump as a.
I think it's totally on brand. And what's interesting, with all what's illogical, with all his talk about how globalization has hurt us, and all his talk about how, imports have hurt us, we have basically the lowest unemployment in history.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if those jobs, if it hurt people, they're not, where are they? They're working, you know?
Right.
So that's number one. And it always amazed me what happened to the people who worked at the checkout counter at the supermarkets I mentioned. They have
Hmm.
jobs.
Right. They're not. Yeah. In today's America, they are working somewhere else. They are
They're
not.
working somewhere else. And I mean, the cover of this week's Economist or last week's Economist is, I mean, the American engine, the whole world is envious of it.
The idea that, again, that this weird idea that we're the suckers and the losers in the world, in the global economy. Every single country in the world would trade places with us tomorrow. Every
Exactly.
one of them.
But in the other thing that we have to talk about, if you close us off, if you build a wall, if you
Hmm.
stop immigration, if you
Right.
stop migration, where's the exchange of ideas that make us great?
Sure.
You look at our Silicon Valley leadership. A lot of those folks weren't born here.
Correct.
Makes
Correct.
America great is immigration and all those new ideas coming into here. No other country has that advantage of all that creativity.
There was an academic paper I read years and years ago about how all these skilled German and Swedish machinists had come over to the U.S. at one point after the Civil War, and it made industrialization in this country one of the most, it was an important unspoken adjunct to how we built our technological base as quickly as we did.
Yeah.
And how that those people who were at the time just as, my German relatives who came to this country were, they were the scum of the earth when they came, and the Italians were the scum of the earth when they came, and everybody gets to be the scum of the earth when they show up here,
Right.
and then they become Americans. It's a proposition, and yes, I think you're hitting on something very important. It's like we live in a world now where great ideas and great intellects and great creativity and great innovation can spring from anybody.
Exactly.
The world, as Friedman says, it's a lot flatter than it used to be. And so I want those kids to come over from India. I want those kids to come over from Korea. I want those kids to come over.
Who do you know is the genius and who do you know is not the genius?
Mm-hmm.
You just you just don't know. But it's what makes America great is that bringing of other people in the mixing of ideas. We're no longer in the age of manufacturing. And unfortunately, that's where Donald Trump's mind is. We're in the
Sure.
age of human knowledge. And manufacturing falls and falls in value. And the country that has the most human capital is the winner of the game.
And that is the world. And you argued this in one of your books. That is the world that we do live in, not the imaginary world anymore. The world we really live in now is about innovation, and it's about human capital. It's about intellectual capital, more than the world that existed. Not only, and look, let's be very real. It was also the world that a lot of people, on both sides of the political aisle, tried to restore. Both sides of the political aisle have tried to rebuild America in the image of something from the 1950s. And it's not going to happen. It doesn't work that way anymore. As challenging as it is, the new world is about software and innovation and technology and that we need every brain to be put to work on those things, in my view.
Oh, I totally agree with you. It's all human capital. It's all human capital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Trump actually misses. He wants walls. He wants walls on the borders. He wants walls against trade.
Mm-hmm.
He wants walls. But, maybe, that would have worked in a mercantilist economy of 1600.
Right. Yeah, it's not even the Smoot-Hawley era he's talking about. He's talking about a pre-industrial era.
Correct.
I mean, and that's just like where your brain gets that in anybody who was, and look, Donald Trump is 70 years old, that's fine, or almost 80 years old, that's fine. But he has lived in this world as it really is now for at least 40 of those years. He's had to have seen it reshaping the globe. Whether you like it or not doesn't matter. It's a real thing. It's an actual thing. It's not an optional sort of formation.
Oh, he's fighting for yesterday, and Ed Koch, the mayor.
Sure, I knew Mayor Koch.
Yeah, but told this tale. He would walk on Coney Island where all these retirees were sitting on the bench by the ocean, and they would say, "Mr. Mayor, make it like it used to be." And that's exactly what Trump used to be. Used to be is only better in some memories. It's not necessarily better in reality.
Right. I mean, the same used to be of 1950 was also a world that doesn't look like today at all in terms of equality and human right. In terms of equality or human rights or the quality of life even. Well, I have to say this is I think this is something people have undercounted in looking at this election, is that we really are making a choice now between an imaginary past and an actual future.
Yes. So true. So true.
What else should people be thinking about when they look at the economy as a campaign issue? Because, you know, the inflationary pressures of the last couple of years have been Donald Trump's best friend. They have been the core of his campaign. He has managed to use those as a weapon against Joe Biden, and very effectively. I'm going to say it. You know, it's been his most effective talking point for a lot of middle class voters. How should people be thinking about this inflationary period we've just come out of?
Well, first, I think the Biden administration made a huge political mistake that we're suffering from now. They didn't recognize and own inflation. You know, I mean, we all, when there was a bout of inflation under Nixon. Nixon instantly did a lot of talking. He tried to get price controls on, did many different things. He played the political game. The Biden administration didn't recognize reality, and that was bad. That was politically bad because people were getting hurt. They honestly got hurt. Now,
sure.
From the reality, from an economist point of view, from an academic point of view, the inflation was totally tied to post up demand and supply chain problems from COVID. We had, of all the G7 countries, we had the lowest inflation. But you can't tell an average person that we have a lower inflation than France when they have to go buy eggs once a week.
Right.
Right. You know, that's not the argument. But you could level with them and you could talk about it. In the Biden administration, I think that's probably, I think Biden's been one of the great presidents. That was one of his failures. Everybody has mistakes. That was one of his. But the fact is, the inflation's over.
Yeah, it is. It's zeroed out now. And I think, you know, all the Nobel Prize economists, all the economists that are out there looking at the comparative plans between Vice President Harris and Donald Trump, I mean, talk a little bit about that, because they have certainly weighed in very decisively about the damage Trump would do and the upside of Harris's planning right now.
Well, everybody from who you would think would be Trump supporters like Goldman Sachs on down has openly made statements about the Harris plan is so much more beneficial than the Trump plan for the average citizen. I mean, it's radically different.
Right. It's not even close.
Not even close. But once again, unfortunately, the politics of perception. And if you were a working man or woman and really got hurt by the inflation, all you see that was in Donald Trump's time, there was no inflation. I mean, that's what you see. It's a hard political argument.
It is. I agree with that. It's a tough political argument, and a lot of the people that are paying attention in the campaign are not going to be immediately like, "Oh, well, Nobel Prize winners say this, so why am I still paying $3.50 for gas?"
Correct.
It's a tough. It's a tough assignment, and And a lot of that is I think that's done some political damage.
At that point, and one of the problems with inflation, one of the many, many problems, it stops, but it doesn't go down necessarily.
Right.
Oh, you can have periods of deflation, but in general, it stops it. So the prices aren't going to go down to make to yesterday.
Right. Well, Edward, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show today, folks. Edward Goldberg, a brilliant guy on the economy, somebody I listen to on this stuff because he understands beyond the headlines and the politics and the sloganeering, the mechanics and the math of the whole thing. Edward, I appreciate you coming on the show today. We look forward to talking to you again sometime.
I appreciate you having me. Take care.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Hey, folks, I'm recording this on Monday. So just last night, we witnessed, you'll hear this on Wednesday, I think. Just last night, we witnessed something in Madison Square Garden that was as repulsive as you might have imagined. It was Donald Trump's American Bund rally. And for the entire time since they announced the Madison Square Garden event, there was nothing more certain to outrage the MAGAs if you said, oh, you mean like the one the American Nazis had in 1939. Because we knew what would come from this. We know who he is. We know what kind of people surround him. We know what kind of ideas motivate them. We know what drives their base. And it's the same sort of thing that drove that base back in 1939. And I know that's hard to hear if you're a MAGA. And that's hard to hear if you're a Trump supporter. But you heard it last night over and over and over again. Not just the comedian who called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage, who made jokes about black men and watermelons. Not just the multi-billionaire who walked out, who was played out onto the stage by the song Dixie. Not just the speaker who said that Kamala Harris was controlled by her pimp handlers. Not just the people who called her a bitch and other obscenities. Not just the people who got out there like Stephen Miller and said, we will have an America only for Americans. I added the German accent just because Hitler once said we will have a Germany only for Germans. It's not a coincidence. None of it's a coincidence, okay? You got people up there like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson, who made his own incredibly racist insults to Vice President Harris. You had RFK Jr. up there basically promising to become the Secretary of Polio. It was a mutant parade. Every bit of it was right on target. You knew exactly what was coming from the second they started. You knew it was going to be racially motivated. You knew it was going to be ethnically motivated. And by the way, Magas, I don't care if you have a few black people in the crowd or a few Jewish people in the crowd. When the comedian's up there saying, yeah, those Jews don't want to part with the paper, we get it. They may be drawn to MAGA for some particular bespoke reasons, but the movement itself is corrupt and polluted. The movement itself is evil. The movement itself is comprised of people who accept evil. The movement itself is comprised of people who accept the white supremacy and white race replacement theory and all that other stuff. Okay, so the Madison Square Garden rally would have been, if it's just a Trump speech, the usual story. There was nothing really there that was new. It was the same old, same old, same old. We didn't get Sharks or Hannibal Lecter, but it was the same sort of like word vomit of grievances and complaints and beefs and feuds. And that was his last moment to argue for the campaign. That was his last moment to make an argument on why we should elect him. Yeah, you can run around the states for the next few days, but that was the big one. This was something they put a lot of time and effort and money into. They really worked hard to bust all those people in from New Jersey and from Long Island. And it flopped. They knew it flopped by the end of the night, because you had Puerto Rican entertainers and musicians and actresses and actors coming out and saying, what? And in fact, when you added up J-Lo, Mark Anthony, Bad Bunny, Fat Joe, all these folks, by the time you started adding up all those folks, they were reaching hundreds of millions of people on their social platforms, on Instagram and elsewhere. And so now in America, where there are large Puerto Rican populations in almost every one of the swing states, the last message they heard from Donald Trump's people is Puerto Rico is an island of garbage floating in the ocean. This is at a moment where people started to pay attention to the campaign. So what has Trump's campaign been doing all day today on Monday? They've been playing defense all day today. They are on defense. They know it was a mistake. His own people were spinning reporters last night like, oh, I had nothing to do with that. I didn't touch that. I didn't see the speech. Every speech in that teleprompter was approved and vetted by the Trump campaign. Don't buy their bullshit. Every single word. I was told Donald Trump personally picked the order of go for the candidates or for the speakers. But so now they've spent, most of Sunday night and most of Monday playing defense. Great. They deserve to be playing defense because they fucked up. And then this afternoon, Elon Musk puts out an ad calling Vice President Harris the C word. Now, I have a salty damn mouth, as you know. I have a really, really salty mouth, like a damn sailor, okay? I don't call women the C word. I don't. It's a line for me. I just don't do it. It's just gross. But that's what Elon did. Now, they tried to make the ad into a joke. But the C word, the C word, the C word, the C word. And then at the end of the ad, they say, see you next Tuesday. Oh, you're so subtle, Elon. That genius just shines through your creative work. The fuck out of here. But so they've been on defense Monday afternoon over that. Tomorrow is Tuesday, where Kamala Harris is going to go to the Ellipse, and she's going to make a banger of a speech about freedom and liberty and the rule of law and the Constitution and protecting American democracy from Donald Trump, which, as you may recall, folks, in that same exact location is where Donald Trump launched his terrorist attack on the United States Capitol on January 6th. This is, I believe, a brilliant counter-programming move. Trump is going to then spend all day Wednesday, when you're listening to this, on defense about January 6th, where he will go back again and remind people that he wants to pardon the terrorists who attacked our Capitol, that he wants to pardon the criminals who were charging that building that day. He wants to pardon the guy with the Camp Auschwitz shirt. He wants to pardon the guy who took a shit on the floor of the rotunda. He wants to pardon the people that were charging cops with flagpoles and bear spray and tire irons. He wants to pardon the people who were his shock troops that day. It's going to be fantastic. He'll do that, by the way, because Steve Bannon will be out of prison on Wednesday, and he'll be charging up the hill, trying to make sure Trump gets back on the revolutionary Trump burn America to the ground agenda that Bannon has been secretly architecting behind the scenes for a very long time now. This is a week that you are going to remember the rest of your lives. We are going to watch this campaign opening up. I'm going to make a prediction that I'm slightly cribbing off Matthew Dowd, but I'm going to make a prediction. You are going to see the polling averages start to back into a position where it looks a little more like a Harris lead, because that's what's really been there all along. I feel great about this election. It is Wednesday. By the time you hear this, there will only be 6 days left until the election. And I want you tomorrow, if your early voting is still running in your state, go early vote when you listen to this. Go out and vote. Also, if you have an absentee ballot that can still be sent, get it in the mail immediately so it is counted on election day. If you can drop your absentee ballot at a supervisor of elections office, get out and do that. I love the idea of dropping stuff at ballot boxes right now, but Republicans are setting them on fire out in Washington State right now, so let's be careful about that. But you need to vote. We can win this thing, guys. We can win this thing big. I am sensing now the prospect of a victory that will reset a lot of the shit we've been through. I'm sensing the prospect. It's not locked in. It's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. But I am sensing that Americans have just finished, just done. They want it over. They want him out. They want this thing to reset. We've got that chance. Get out and vote. We'll see you next time.